"Mom's sick, so I came instead," the little girl said, placing the folder carefully on the front desk. The receptionist blinked, her manicured fingers frozen above the keyboard. She looked down at the folder, then at the girl, light, maybe 9 years old, black, in a neat purple dress and old sneakers. The child's voice wasn't trembling. It carried a quiet gravity that didn't belong to someone so small. Behind the desk, other employees of Fulton MedTech glanced up, distracted from their conversations and coffees. This wasn't a place where children wandered in. Especially not alone. Especially not with resumes. "What did you say, sweetheart?" the receptionist asked, leaning forward. "My mom had an interview this morning," the girl replied, "but she couldn't come. She's in the hospital, so I came instead." There was a silence so thick it seemed to slow the air. Then from across the lobby, a deep voice broke through. "Did you say your mother is in the hospital?" A man in an elegant gray suit stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the child. He looked out of place among the lobby crowd, not because of his sharp attire, but because people instinctively moved aside when he approached. Thomas Bradley, 45, CEO of Fulton MedTech, paused a few feet from the girl. His jaw tightened. The girl didn't flinch. She reached into her small canvas bag and pulled out an old photograph. She held it up. "This is my mom. Her name is Denise Moore." Bradley took the photo instinctively, as if drawn by something familiar. The moment he saw the face in the picture, everything else faded. He froze. Denise. Her hair was shorter then, her smile vibrant. It wasn't just any photo. It was the same one he'd kept a copy of for years before he'd finally lost it during one of his many moves. She had written something on the back. He was sure of it. He turned the photo over and there it was in her neat, slanted handwriting. "To Tommy, the only one who believed I could make it." His throat closed up. "Where is your mother now?" he asked, his voice gentler. "She collapsed this morning," the girl answered. "She's at Grady Hospital. They think it was a stroke." He looked at the girl again. "What's your name?" "Maya," she said. Bradley took a slow breath, steadying himself. "Maya, would you take me to her?" The receptionist's eyes widened, her fingers twitching toward the phone. No one said anything. No one dared to. In all her years at the company, she had never seen Thomas Bradley drop everything, especially not for a child carrying a resume and a memory. Maya nodded. "Yes, sir, I can take you." Bradley handed the photo back with great care as if it were made of glass. Then he turned to the receptionist. "Cancel my morning. All of it." But sir, you have," he repeated. He looked back at Maya. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. He just studied her face, searching for traces of her mother's eyes, the curve of her chin. He found them. "Let's go," he said. And with that, the girl took the hand of a man who had spent years building empires of medicine and machines, and led him quietly out of the towering glass building into the noise of Atlanta's streets, a truth he hadn't expected to find, and a woman he thought he had lost forever. If Maya's story and her mother's strength touched your heart, leave a comment and share your thoughts. Don't forget to like this video to support stories that move and inspire, and make sure to subscribe so you never miss another journey of hope, humanity, and unexpected reunion, brought to you by BUP Stories. The car ride was quiet. Maya sat beside Thomas Bradley in the back seat of the sleek black town car, her small hands folded in her lap. She stared out the window as the city passed brick buildings, gas stations, flashing traffic lights. The world moved fast out there, but inside the car, time seemed to hold its breath. Bradley stole glances at her. She looked so much like Denise. The shape of her nose, the quiet strength in her eyes, all brought back memories he thought had long faded. Memories of late-night study sessions, cheap takeout on campus steps, and her laugh, God, her laugh like music in a storm. "Was it just you and your mother?" he asked gently. Maya nodded. "She raised me alone. No relatives, friends." She said, "Family isn't always who shares your blood. Sometimes it's who shows up, and it was always just her showing up." Bradley turned to the window, hiding the tightness in his chest. That sounded exactly like Denise. When they arrived at Grady Memorial Hospital, the air was thick with antiseptic and urgency. Nurses bustled past with charts, stretchers rolled by, and overhead announcements echoed through the corridors. But amid all the movement, Maya walked with calm certainty. She led him through the maze of hallways like someone who had done this more times than she should have. "She's in room 412, Maya said as they reached the elevator. Bradley followed her without a word. The door to room 412 creaked open slowly. The sight inside caught his breath. Denise lay still, her face pale against the white pillow, her chest rising slowly beneath the hospital gown. Machines beeped rhythmically beside her, and 4-drip dangled above like a silent sentinel. Bradley stepped inside cautiously, his polished shoes making almost no sound against the linoleum floor. "She was making breakfast when it happened," Maya said softly. One moment she was humming a song, the next she dropped the pan. She couldn't speak. "I called 911. He looked at the girl, astonished. "You knew what to do." "She taught me. She said we couldn't afford to panic. So I didn't." He swallowed hard. "You saved her life." "No," Maya said, shaking her head. "I just did what she would have done." Bradley approached the bedside. He hadn't seen Denise in almost 2 decades, but she still looked like her, just older, tired, as if life had demanded too much and given too little in return. He reached out and gently took her hand. "She ever talk about me?" he asked quietly. Maya hesitated. "Once I found an old letter she never sent. It had your name. I think she missed you." Bradley closed his eyes for a second. "We were in love a long time ago. I let my ambition get in the way. She stayed behind to care for her mother. I told myself I'd write. I never did." Maya didn't respond. She just pulled a chair closer and sat down beside her mother, laying her hand next to his. The room fell into silence, filled only with the hum of machines and the faint scent of antiseptic. After a few minutes, Maya stood up. "I'm going to get some water. Do you want anything?" Bradley shook his head. "I'm fine. Thank you." As the door closed behind her, he turned back to Denise. "You still remember that night on the quad? You said I'd forget you in a year. I said I'd never forgive myself if I did. You were right." He looked down at her hand, frail now, with lines of time carved into it. He squeezed it gently. "I should have come back for you." Her fingers twitched just slightly. He blinked. Had he imagined it? "Denise," he whispered. Her eyelids fluttered. "Just once." Then again, he leaned forward, heart racing. "Denise, it's me, Tommy." Her lips parted, a soft breath escaping, but no words followed. Her eyes opened slightly, unfocused, searching. "It's okay," he said, holding back emotion. "You're okay. Maya's here. She's amazing, just like you." A tear slipped from her eye. Bradley brushed it away with the back of his hand. At that moment, Maya returned, holding a small paper cup of water. She froze in the doorway. "She's awake?" "She's trying," Bradley said, glancing back. She moved. Maya hurried over and placed the cup on the side table. She reached for her mother's other hand. "Mama, it's me. It's Maya." Denise's eyes shifted toward the sound. She blinked slowly. "She sees you," Bradley whispered. Maya smiled through tears. "I told you I'd bring help, and I did." Denise blinked once more. "I don't know if she can hear everything," Bradley said, "but maybe we should talk to her anyway. Let her rest with voices she loves." And so they did. For the next hour, Maya and Thomas took turns sharing stories, memories, moments of silence filled with presence. Maya told her about the time she tried to cook eggs and nearly burned the pan. Bradley spoke of the company he'd built, the one he now wished he could have built with her by his side. They sat by her side, a child and a man bound not by blood, but by a woman who had once carried both their futures in her hands. When the nurse finally came to check on Denise, she was surprised to find the patient slightly more alert. "She's fighting," the nurse said with a smile. "She must have a good reason." Maya looked at Bradley. "Maybe she knows she's not alone anymore." He nodded. "She never was. I just forgot that." Outside the window, the city kept moving just like always. But in room 412, something had shifted. The past wasn't erased, but it had been acknowledged. And in that quiet, hopeful room, the first pieces of something new had started to take shape. By the next morning, the news of Thomas Bradley's unexpected visit to Grady Memorial had already begun to ripple through the halls of Fulton MedTech. Rumors flooded, left in the middle of meetings, canceled a day's worth of executive calls, and gone silent for over 12 hours. Some whispered it had to do with a secret affair from the past. Others said he was scouting talent from an unlikely place. But none of them knew about the girl named Maya or the woman lying in room 412. Thomas had barely slept. He had stayed at the hospital overnight, refusing to leave Denise's side. Maya, exhausted but composed, had fallen asleep in a recliner near the window, curled under a thin blanket a nurse had given her. Every so often, Thomas had glanced at the child, how steady she was, how she carried the weight of an adult with a grace that made him ache inside. When the nurse came in at dawn for vitals, Denise stirred again. Her eyes opened longer this time, and when Thomas leaned in, he saw clarity flicker in them, not just awareness, recognition. "Tommy." Her voice was weak, dry, barely audible, but it cracked through the silence like thunder. He choked on a breath. "Yes, I'm here." She stared at him, blinking slowly, as if trying to be sure she wasn't hallucinating. "Why are you here?" He smiled, though his eyes were glassy. "Because I should have been here a long time ago." Denise tried to speak again but winced, her throat parched. He quickly poured water from the pitcher and held the straw to her lips. She took 2 slow sips, then exhaled deeply, her fingers twitching around the blanket. "I thought," she whispered, "you forgot me." "I tried," he admitted. "I tried to forget everything, but life has a way of circling back, especially when you least expect it." Denise turned her head slowly and caught sight of Maya still sleeping. Her expression softened. "She came alone." He nodded. "Walked into my building. Gave me your resume. Showed me your picture." He paused. "She's amazing, Denise. Stronger than I think either of us deserve." Tears welled in Denise's eyes. "I didn't want this life for her. I wanted more. She deserves more." He agreed. "And I want to help." Denise looked back at him, uncertain. "Why now?" "Because when she walked into that lobby, I saw you, and I realized there are things you can build from nothing. A company, a brand, but you can't build a soul twice." She turned away, unable to hold his gaze, and he didn't push. There was too much history between them, years of silence, choices made and unmade. But he knew one thing now with certainty. He was no longer going to run from it. Later that morning, Maya awoke to find her mother's eyes open. She rushed to her side, tears springing to her eyes as she reached for her mother's hand. "Mama," she whispered, barely containing her emotion. Denise gave her a tired smile. "Hey, baby. You did it. You got through to him." Maya nodded. "I brought him here just like you would have." They sat together, the three of them, bound by something deeper than words. For a moment, there was nothing but the hum of machines, the soft rustle of sheets, and the rhythmic beat of something new forming a bond, a beginning. Thomas stood and walked toward the window. The skyline of Atlanta stretched out before him. His phone buzzed in his pocket again. Messages from the office, the board, even his executive assistant. He silenced it. He turned back. "I want to do more than just visit. Denise, if you'll let me, I'd like to make things right for you, for Maya." Denise frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, walking back to her, "I want to offer you a full-time role at Fulton MedTech. Flexible hours, medical leave, full coverage, and Maya will have everything she needs." Maya blinked. You'd really do that? He crouched beside her. Maya, I owe your mother more than I can ever repay. But I can start with this. Denise tried to speak, her voice trembling. I don't want charity. It's not charity, he said, eyes locked on hers. It's a second chance for all of us. She looked at Maya, who was now quietly holding both their hands. After a long silence, she gave a slow nod. Okay, she whispered. But not because I need saving. Because my daughter deserves to see people do right. Thomas nodded, his heart heavy but lighter than it had been in years. That afternoon, the discharge papers were discussed. Doctors recommended another 2 days of observation, but Denise was improving faster than expected. Maya spent the day drawing pictures in the hospital's family lounge, while Thomas met with the hospital's billing department to ensure every cost was covered. By evening, as the sun painted golden streaks across the floor, Thomas walked back into the room with a large envelope in hand. I had something brought over, he said, offering it to Maya. She opened it carefully. Inside was a clean copy of her mother's resume, rewritten, reformatted, and printed on crisp ivory paper. Attached was a formal letter of employment from Fulton Medtech, signed by Thomas himself. Maya held it up to her mother. Denise smiled, tears streaming down her cheeks. You see that, Mama? Maya said, voice full of pride. They saw you just like I do. Thomas stepped out into the hallway, letting them share the moment. His heart beat fast, not from nerves, but from something he hadn't felt in a long time, purpose. He pulled out his phone, opened a blank memo, and typed, "Some resumes don't list years of experience. Some just carry proof of survival. Those are the ones that matter most." He hit save and looked back through the glass. In that hospital room, a mother rested, a child smiled, and a man stood quietly remembering what it meant to build something not from power, but from presence. And somewhere deep inside, he heard her voice again. Not Denise's, not Maya's, his own mother's. Long gone, but never forgotten. Character, Thomas. That's what people remember. Not titles, not money. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally starting to become the man she'd hoped he would be. By the end of the week, Denise was discharged from Grady Memorial with a cane in one hand and Maya's small fingers curled into the other. Thomas was waiting by the car, his demeanor less like a CEO and more like a man trying awkwardly to make something right. He opened the car door himself, nodding respectfully as Denise lowered herself into the back seat. I still feel strange letting you do all this, she said once the car pulled into traffic. A driver, executive health insurance, and that letter of employment. It's too much. It's not nearly enough, Thomas replied. You deserve more than what life gave you. I could have been there years ago when it still mattered. Denise turned her face to the window. The buildings flashed by, familiar, but distant. Life doesn't wait for apologies, Tommy. It just keeps moving. Maya, seated between them, glanced from one to the other. But people can stop and say sorry, right? Isn't that what makes them better? She asked. Denise looked at her daughter, then back at Thomas. She's got your stubbornness, she murmured. Thomas smiled faintly. And your courage. They arrived at a small 2-bedroom apartment tucked behind a row of aging townhouses. It wasn't much, but it was clean and bright with family photos carefully arranged along the hallway and a scent of lavender in the air. Thomas offered to help Denise inside, but she waved him off. I've walked alone long enough, she said, steadying herself with the cane. Inside, as Maya poured glasses of orange juice, Thomas wandered near the bookshelf. He noticed a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, bookmarked with an old receipt. She loved that book, Denise said, noticing his gaze. Told me justice doesn't always come from the courtroom. It comes from people standing up when no one else does. Did she tell Maya that? Denise nodded. Every night. Thomas turned toward the hallway where Maya was humming softly to herself. You raised her well. I tried, Denise whispered. I tried without bitterness. They sat in the small kitchen and for the first time in nearly 2 decades they talked, not just about the past or regrets, but about real things, school, faith, the cost of medication, the way Maya had learned to heat canned soup without burning herself. The laughter came slow at first, then easy, but shadows lingered too. Later that afternoon, Thomas stepped outside to take a call. It was his CFO, Raymond Price, a tall, sharply dressed man in his early 50s who had been with the company since its founding. "I've been trying to reach you for 3 days," Raymond said flatly. "Investors are getting twitchy." "I've had urgent personal matters," Thomas replied, glancing back through the window at Maya and Denise sitting on the couch laughing at an old photo album. "I heard something about a girl walking into our building with a resume and a sob story." Raymond's voice carried a cold amusement. Thomas's jaw tightened. "That sob story is real, and so is her mother, Denise Moore." "You remember her name?" There was a pause, then, "She was in our nursing intern program years ago." "Didn't pan out." "Why is this relevant now?" "Because I'm giving her a second chance. She's coming to work with us." Raymond laughed once. A short bark. "You're giving a recovering stroke patient a desk job in medtech?" "Thomas, are you out of your mind? The board's already on edge. They think you're distracted." Thomas lowered his voice. "Let them think what they want. I'm not asking for permission. You're risking the company on sentiment." "No," Thomas said, his tone ice. "I'm building the company I should have built from the start." He ended the call. That night, Denise and Maya joined Thomas for dinner at a small bistro on the east side. The restaurant was quiet, candle-lit, the kind of place where people spoke softly and lingered over coffee. The owner, a friend of Thomas's from college, greeted them warmly and made no mention of the man's usual solo reservations. As they ate, Maya asked a question that stopped the conversation cold. "Why did you and Mama stop talking?" Denise set down her fork. Her eyes flickered toward Thomas. He answered slowly. "Because I made a choice. One that I thought was right for me, but not for us." Did you stop loving her?" "No," he said, voice heavy. "I think I tried to stop remembering her." "That was easier." Maya nodded as if that made sense. "But you remember now?" Thomas looked at Denise every day. Later, as he walked them to their door, Maya turned and wrapped her arms around his waist. "Thank you for helping us," she said. He knelt down to her level. "You helped me first." When she was inside and the door closed, Thomas stood alone under the porch light. The night air was crisp, and the quiet buzz of Atlanta echoed in the distance. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the photograph again, the same one Maya had shown him on that first day. He stared at it for a long moment, then tucked it back into his wallet behind his license. It wasn't just a photo anymore. It was a promise, and he was ready to keep it. Monday morning arrived, draped in gold sunlight and the subtle hum of the city warming into motion. Inside the glass tower of Fulton MedTech, the atmosphere was crisp, professional, just as Thomas Bradley had always designed it to be. But today, something had shifted. As the elevator ascended to the 12th floor, he held a folder in one hand and a to-go coffee in the other. But his mind was still wrapped around the weekend's dinner, Denise's smile, and Maya's quiet courage. When he stepped into the executive wing, his assistant, Carla, a meticulous woman in her late 40s with a sharp eye for detail, was already waiting. "Mr. Bradley," she began cautiously. "HR is concerned about the new administrative hire. No official interview, no onboarding process. They're asking for clarification." Thomas didn't slow his stride. "Tell them I'll handle it personally and prepare the small conference room. I want it cleaned, refurnished, and reassigned by this afternoon." Carla blinked. "That's an executive suite, sir." "Not anymore," he said. "It's Denise Moore's office now." Carla hesitated for a beat, then nodded. "Understood." Word spread quickly. Whispers followed him down the hall, and the boardroom filled with murmurs. Denise Moore, a name many had forgotten or never learned at all, a name now painted on a new brass plate outside the very room where interns once waited nervously for quarterly presentations. That afternoon, Denise arrived in a dark blue dress and a pair of low heels. She moved carefully using her cane, but her posture was straight, her chin lifted. Maya walked beside her, holding her lunchbox as they entered the lobby, heads turned. Thomas met them by the security desk. Ready? Denise gave him a look. I've faced death and medical debt. A corporate hallway doesn't scare me. He smiled. Good, because this place is overdue for a dose of real-world strength. As they walked toward her new office, people paused mid-conversation. Some offered polite nods, others stared in disbelief. Raymond Price, standing at the espresso bar, watched with thinly veiled irritation. I hope this isn't another charity case for the press, he said under his breath to a colleague. But Thomas heard him. He stopped, turned, and looked Raymond directly in the eye. It's not charity, Ray. It's correction. Denise entered her new office slowly, running her hand over the polished desk. On it sat a framed copy of her resume, newly printed and placed beside a nameplate. Denise Moore, Community Liaison, Fulton MedTech. She turned to Thomas. You really mean this? I do, he said. You're not just here for admin work. I want your insight. Real-world experience. You'll help us understand the people we say we serve. Denise laughed softly. You realize that sounds like work most executives avoid. That's why I need someone who's not an executive, he said. I need someone honest. Across the day, Denise met with department leads, joined a conference call with the product design team, and reviewed pamphlets meant for underserved communities. Her feedback was sharp, empathetic, and grounded in the reality of people who lived paycheck to paycheck, just like she had. Meanwhile, Maya stayed in a cozy room set up by Carla, complete with books, coloring pads, and a beanbag chair. But by mid-afternoon, she wandered the halls, observing everything with quiet interest. In the break room, she offered a napkin to a young intern who had spilled his coffee. In the hallway, she picked up papers someone dropped. She never asked for attention. She simply moved through the building like she belonged. Raymond watched it all from a distance, growing more agitated. During a strategy session with the senior team, he finally spoke up. Tom, he said. I think we need to talk in private. They stepped into the hallway. Raymond closed the door behind them. This is a business, not a redemption arc. You're blurring lines, bringing in people from your personal life, assigning them roles without vetting. You're making decisions based on emotion. Thomas folded his arms. And you're making judgments based on comfort. Denise brings something to this company. No one in that room does. Humility, experience, humanity. And if that makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's not her place that needs reconsidering. Raymond scoffed. This will blow up. Mark my words. Thomas looked him square in the eye. Then I'll rebuild it myself. That evening, after most employees had left, Thomas walked back to Denise's office. She was still there, organizing a shelf, her movements slow but determined. Maya was on the floor drawing a picture of the building. He leaned against the door frame. You did good today. Denise glanced up. I didn't faint, so I'll take the win. You were more prepared than half the boardroom. She paused, then asked, Why now, Thomas? Really? Why fight so hard now when you have everything to lose? He didn't answer right away. He stepped closer, picked up one of the pamphlets she had marked up earlier. Because I'm tired of building things that impress people but mean nothing, and because a little girl walked into my building and reminded me that character starts with choice, especially the hard ones. Denise nodded slowly. She's changed both of us, hasn't she? Thomas looked at Maya, now adding flowers to her drawing. She's more than we deserve. As they stepped out into the evening air, the city lights blinked to life. Thomas offered to drive them home, but Denise declined. We'll walk, she said. She likes watching the streetlights flicker on. Oh, okay. They walked down the sidewalk, Maya's tiny hand swinging between them. And as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Thomas knew something had shifted, not just in the company, not just in his life, but in the space where regret had once lived. Something new had grown there. Hope, quiet, steady, and finally real. 3 weeks passed. Within the walls of Fulton MedTech, change moved like a subtle breeze, hardly noticed by some, but unmistakably shifting the temperature. Denise Moore had not only survived her first month, she had brought a new rhythm to the way teams thought and communicated. Every Thursday morning, she held informal community insight meetings in the break room. Engineers, assistants, HR reps, people came not for policy updates, but for perspective. She told stories. Stories about neighbors who couldn't afford insulin, about mothers who worked 2 jobs but still missed appointments because of poor transit. And she didn't preach, she invited. Thomas sat in the back most mornings, sipping his coffee like just another employee. He didn't speak much during these sessions. He didn't need to. Her voice filled the room in ways even quarterly sales graphs couldn't. But while the hallway conversations warmed to Denise's presence, the top floor simmered with discomfort. Raymond Price had not backed down. The company's CFO remained wary of this emotional leadership experiment, as he called it, and now he had rallied 2 board members who shared his view. Thomas had gone rogue. It was time to intervene. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. Thomas received the memo with little surprise. He knew it was coming. Still, he took his time walking into the conference room, letting the silence stretch long enough to make everyone notice. 12 people sat around the polished walnut table. Raymond cleared his throat as Thomas took his seat. "Thank you for joining us, Thomas," he said, voice syrupy. "We're concerned." Thomas nodded once. "Go ahead." Raymond pressed a button on the screen. Charts appeared: financial trends, investor sentiment indexes, staffing anomalies. "You've made unilateral decisions, hiring a non-vetted employee, reallocating executive space, restructuring engagement policies without board approval. Some of us feel this lacks strategic prudence." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "Denise Moore is more than qualified. You've all read her resume, and if not, I brought copies." He placed a stack on the table. No one reached for them. "This isn't about qualifications," said Linda Green, a longtime board member. "It's about tone, image. Bringing personal history into company leadership, it muddies the waters." "Muddy waters grow deeper roots," Thomas replied evenly. Raymond sighed. "Let's not turn this into poetry. We're discussing liability, investor faith, stability." Thomas stood, not raising his voice, but making it impossible to ignore him. "This company was founded on innovation. We disrupted diagnostics, pioneered affordable treatment modules, and we branded ourselves as a company that listens to lives. So, what happens when someone finally speaks, and we don't like how they sound?" No one answered. He continued, "Denise Moore survived a system we say we want to fix. She raised a child alone, put herself through school, and got back up after a stroke that would have broken most people. If her story makes this board uncomfortable, maybe the problem isn't her." The room grew tense. Raymond said coldly, "Are you threatening to resign over this?" "I'm promising to lead," Thomas said. "And if that means leading in a different way, so be it." After the meeting, as Thomas walked back to his office, he found Maya sitting in the waiting area sketching on a legal pad. She looked up and smiled. "Are they mad at you?" He chuckled softly. "Maybe. Grown-ups get nervous when things change." She nodded thoughtfully. "Mama says when people get nervous, it means you're probably doing something right." "I think she's right." Later that evening, Thomas stopped by Denise's office. She was finishing a call with a community clinic in Decatur, working on a new outreach program. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest," he said, sitting on the edge of her desk. "I always do," she replied with a smirk. "You okay?" He nodded. "They're scared. You've changed the narrative, and they don't know what to do with it." "Then let's keep going," she said. "Let's make them listen." Over the next week, Fulton MedTech's newsletter featured a new internal column, Voices from the Field, written by Denise. It wasn't flashy, no jargon, no PR polish, just truths. The first piece was about her first night home from the hospital, unable to lift her own bag of groceries. The second was about a patient who walked 6 miles to get his blood pressure medication refilled. The emails sparked responses. Dozens, then hundreds. Employees began sharing their own stories. For the first time in company history, a story outperformed a product launch. Meanwhile, Maya continued to bloom in the company's quiet corners. She became a familiar sight reading in the HR lounge, offering feedback on pamphlet colors, even organizing a small birthday card drive for the janitorial staff. No one had asked her to do it. She simply noticed a kindness that was missing and filled the space. One afternoon, she found Thomas in the cafeteria alone at a window table. "Mr. Thomas," she asked, sliding into the seat beside him. "Do grown-ups get scared of feelings?" He blinked. "Sometimes." "Why?" "Because feelings can make you see things differently, and change can feel like a loss, even when it's a good thing." She nodded again, her pencil tapping the table. "But if nobody feels, how do they know what's real?" He stared at her and for a long moment didn't answer. Then he said, "You should be the next CEO." Maya grinned. "Maybe after recess." That night, as Thomas left the office, he stood outside for a long time. The city glowed against the evening sky. He looked up at the Fulton MedTech sign, lit from below like a promise. Inside that building, a woman who had once been overlooked was now leading a quiet revolution. And beside her, a little girl was teaching them all how to feel again. Whatever storm the board stirred, he was ready. Because real change doesn't start with policies. It starts with people. It was a Wednesday morning in late spring when Denise arrived at work to find a small envelope on her desk. The handwriting on the front was neat, familiar. She opened it slowly. Inside was a short note from Thomas. "Come to the roof at noon. Bring Maya." She glanced at the clock. It was barely past 10. 2 more hours. Still, her heart beat faster than usual. She folded the note and slipped it into her pocket, then resumed typing up the weekly staff memo, though her mind drifted back to old memories she hadn't unpacked in years. Roofs, notes, promises not kept. Downstairs, Maya was finishing a mural. Over the past few weeks, with Carla's permission and the support of several departments, Maya had been quietly decorating the children's corner in the employee wellness room. She painted a giant tree with branches that curled across the wall, each leaf carrying the name of someone in the building who'd made her feel welcome. She was adding the final detail, a small heart with the initials DM and TB, when Denise appeared at the door. "Time to go," her mother said, trying to hide a nervous smile. "Where are we going?" "The roof, apparently." When they reached the top floor, Carla was waiting. She gave a small smile and gestured toward the stairwell door at the end of the hall. "He's expecting you." They climbed slowly. Denise still walked with a slight limp, her recovery steady, but incomplete. Maya, as always, held her hand without saying a word. When they reached the roof, the midday sun bathed the skyline in warmth. And there, under a white canopy, stood Thomas next to a black cloth draped over what looked like a framed canvas on an easel. "I hope this doesn't feel dramatic," he said, offering each of them a glass of lemonade from a small table nearby. "It already does," Denise replied with a half-smile. "What's this about?" Thomas took a breath. "You remember the hallway near the founders' portraits? All those oil paintings of stern-faced men in suits?" Denise raised an eyebrow. "Hard to forget. I always wondered why the wall stopped at the late 90s. "It stopped when we started building walls we couldn't see," he said. "So, I decided it was time to add someone who broke through one." He reached for the cloth and pulled it away. The painting beneath was not oil, not traditional. It was mixed media photographs, sketches, a warm palette of browns and golds. At the center was Denise sitting in her office, her cane leaning nearby, Maya standing proudly beside her. In the corners, there were faded snippets, a scan of her original resume, a photo of her and Maya at the hospital, a headline from the internal newsletter titled Voices from the Field. "Why listening still matters." Denise gasped softly. Maya's eyes lit up. I call it the pivot point, Thomas said. Because that's what you've been for me, for this place. Denise walked closer, her fingers trembling slightly as they hovered near the frame. Why would you do this? Because when we tell the story of what this company became, he said, I want people to know it didn't start with a boardroom decision. It started with a woman walking back into a world that once closed the door on her and refusing to stay out. Maya beamed. It's beautiful. You look like a superhero. Denise chuckled. Honey, superheroes don't wear orthopedic shoes. They do now, Thomas said quietly as the wind swept across the rooftop. A silence fell between them, heavy with meaning. Then Maya spoke again. Can I ask something kind of serious? Both adults turned toward her. If people saw Mama all along, would any of this have happened? Denise looked down, her jaw tightening. Thomas answered, his voice even. That's the truth. They didn't see her because they weren't looking, and that's on all of us. Maya nodded. But they see her now. Denise turned back to the painting, her throat tightening. You know, I used to think I'd never walk through that front door again unless I was cleaning it. I thought that was my ceiling. You broke through it, Thomas said. And you lifted us with you. They stood there for a few more minutes, the city around them bustling, unaware of the quiet transformation happening above. When they finally made their way back inside, Denise felt lighter. Not healed, not fixed, but recognized, and sometimes that was more powerful than praise. Later that afternoon, the portrait was hung in the executive hallway. It faced the elevators, greeting every employee who passed with a story that couldn't be ignored. Some stopped to stare, some simply nodded. One young technician left a sticky note beneath it that read, "Thank you for making space for us." Raymond passed by it once and said nothing. But the next day, he forwarded an internal memo to the board suggesting that employee engagement had seen an unprecedented shift in morale and productivity. He didn't mention the portrait. He didn't have to. That evening, as Denise prepared dinner at home, Maya sat at the table drawing. Mama, she asked. Do you think they'll ever paint me? Denise smiled, stirring the pot on the stove. Sweetheart, I think you already started your own mural. Outside, the sky stretched wide and clear. And for the first time in years, Denise felt something she hadn't dared name before. Not just peace, pride, hard-earned, quiet, and hers. It began with a letter, not an email, not a memo. A handwritten envelope slid beneath Denise's office door one quiet Friday morning. The handwriting was elegant, slightly slanted, and unfamiliar. She paused mid-sentence on her weekly report and bent to pick it up. Her name was written with care. Miss Denise Moore. Maya was off at school that morning, and Thomas was on a video call with a medical startup overseas. For a brief moment, the hallway outside her office was still. Denise opened the letter slowly. Inside was a single sheet of fine cream paper. Dear Miss Moore, you do not know me, but I know of you. My mother worked in housekeeping at Fulton MedTech for 12 years. She passed away 2 years ago from complications that could have been prevented had she not waited too long to seek help because she didn't trust the system. She told me once that in buildings like these, people like her didn't belong, that she was invisible, except when someone needed a spill cleaned or a trash bin emptied. She was proud of her work, but not of how she was treated. I walked past the new portrait yesterday. I saw you. I saw the little girl beside you, and I cried because someone like my mother is finally seen. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for standing where others turned away. Signed, a daughter of someone who once felt invisible. Denise read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in her drawer. Her hands trembled, not from weakness, but from a tidal wave of emotion that rushed up and over her like the coldest, most bracing truth. She sat back in her chair, staring at the ceiling, trying to breathe through the pressure behind her eyes. Later that afternoon, she showed the letter to Thomas. He read it silently, his face still. When he finished, he handed it back and said, "You've become a symbol, Denise." I didn't ask to be. No, he said. But maybe that's what makes it real. In the weeks that followed, Denise noticed small shifts in the building. People held elevator doors longer. Conversations in the break room turned more open, more personal. One afternoon, a junior analyst from finance, a white man in his 30s, approached her to say, "Thank you." "For what?" she asked, genuinely surprised. "For changing how my daughter sees this company. She read the article about you in the employee newsletter and asked if you were a real person. I told her yes. She said she wants to be you when she grows up." Denise laughed gently. "Tell her she'll be someone even better." Despite the progress, not everything moved smoothly. During a leadership training session, Denise was invited to speak on inclusive storytelling. She prepared carefully, balancing her personal journey with actionable insights. But midway through the session, a senior manager interrupted. "With all due respect," he said, "isn't this all a bit emotional? Shouldn't we be focusing on performance metrics instead of narratives?" The room tensed. Denise paused, measuring her words. Stories are metrics. They reveal what numbers can't. Data tells you how many patients missed an appointment. Stories tell you why they missed it. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was awakening. Afterward, 2 employees approached her privately. One, a middle-aged woman from accounting, admitted that she had been hiding her son's autism diagnosis out of fear it might affect how others perceived her. The other, a young black intern, said, "You make it feel like I don't have to code switch just to be here." Denise walked home that night with Maya skipping ahead, humming a made-up tune about city lights and lemonade. They passed a mural near the bus stop, and Maya stopped. "Mama," she said, pointing. "Why don't we paint something here?" Denise smiled. "What would we paint?" "A big open door," Maya said, "and everyone walking through it." The next day, Denise brought the idea to Thomas. "Let's commission a local artist," she said. "Let's make it public." He nodded slowly. "It's time this company steps outside its own walls." Together, they reached out to community centers, schools, local art collectives. Within a week, a plan formed, a collaborative mural painted along the public-facing wall of Fulton Medtech's campus. It would be created by employees and residents, an evolving canvas of shared stories. As the first paint touched concrete, Maya stood with a brush in her hand, beaming. She wrote the word hope in large sweeping letters. Denise added a tiny house beside it, representing safety. Others followed. A pair of hands clasped in solidarity. A heartbeat line across a city skyline. A stethoscope wrapping around a mother and child. It became more than a mural. It became a message. And every day, people stopped to add something new. One afternoon, as Denise watched a nurse from the nearby clinic add a strand of ivy climbing up the side, Thomas stepped beside her. "This was your idea," he said. "And Maya's, I think." It was in the air. "We just listened." Thomas turned toward her. "There's a board meeting next month. They want to discuss legacy planning." Denise narrowed her eyes. "Yours?" He nodded. "I want you at the table." She blinked, surprised. "Thomas, I'm the reason this company has a soul again." He said, "They can keep the spreadsheets. You bring the story." She didn't answer right away. She looked at the mural, at Maya, at the ivy still growing. Then she nodded. "Okay, let's change what legacy means." And as the sun dipped behind the mural, the light caught the word hope just right. It gleamed, not as a dream, but as a plan in motion. The morning sun filtered softly through the boardroom's high windows as Denise walked in today. Her stride confident, she looked around the long mahogany table at the familiar faces. Board members, executives, even Raymond seated stiffly at the far end. Thomas sat beside her, offering a quick nod. This was the fourth quarter strategy meeting, but this time the agenda was different. It began not with projections, but with purpose. Thomas cleared his throat. "Before we review Q4 numbers, I want to introduce someone who's redefined what growth means for us." He gestured to Denise. "Miss Moore," she stood, taking a moment to gather herself. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on her. These were the people who had challenged her, questioned her, even dismissed her. But here she was, about to speak, not as an outsider, but as a leader. "Thank you," she began. "When I started here, I brought a resume. Today, I bring a responsibility not just to the numbers, but to the people behind them." A murmur rippled across the room. "I've spent weeks meeting our staff, talking to community partners, listening to concerns about access, equity, inclusion. What I've learned is simple. We offer products that save lives, but some of the people we aim to serve never have the chance to use them. Transportation, trust, cost, these barriers matter." She paused, letting the board absorb her words. "We need to bridge the gap. I propose a pilot program. Mobile clinics partnering with local community centers. We'll deploy telehealth vans staffed by nurses offering screenings and follow-ups. It's not charity, it's outreach, real impact." She clicked a slide on the screen showing projected costs, potential reach, community partners, and performance metrics tied to long-term brand loyalty. Raymond leaned forward. "The initial costs are significant, Denise. What's the expected ROI?" She replied steadily. "In 3 years, we expect fewer gaps in underserved regions. That translates to market growth, better data for continuous development, and most important, longer customer lifespans. That's value beyond quarterly earnings." Board members exchanged glances. Some nodded slowly. One elderly member spoke. "And how will we measure social impact alongside financials?" Denise smiled. "We'll track patient follow-ups, community trust scores, partnership referrals, and ultimately health outcomes. We'll publish an annual impact report." The room quieted in contemplation. Thomas leaned in. "I fully support this, but I won't insist. I invite you to decide." Then Denise's gaze met Raymond's. He cleared his throat. I admit I underestimated her," he said. "This is bold, but I also see depth in the strategy. I'm in favor." Others murmured assent. By the end of the hour, the proposal passed unanimously. Relief and joy washed over Denise. Those months of quiet transformation had paid off not as a token gesture, but as strategy. She had not only changed corporate culture. She had shifted corporate direction. After the meeting, the team gathered near the elevator for light applause. Denise met them there. The child beamed, proud and hopeful. "Mommy," she said softly. "You did it." She hugged her daughter close, tears in her eyes. Thomas shook Denise's hand firmly. "This is the start of something big." That evening, Denise walked out of the building with Thomas and Maya. The mural they'd painted months earlier glowed dimly as dusk settled. Maya stopped at the word hope, touching the letter O. Denise did the same. Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder. "You turned hope into action." Maya looked up at them. "What's next?" Denise squeezed her hand. "Now we build on it." And somewhere beyond the horizon, Atlanta's skyline glowed brighter. Not because of the lights, but because of what they stood for. Change, courage, and the shining promise of justice fulfilled. In that moment, the past and present converged, and the future, once hidden in doubt, became undeniably clear. The weeks following the board's approval of Denise's community initiative passed in a flurry of motion. Telehealth vans were commissioned. Partnerships with local clinics were formalized. And Denise found herself traveling across Atlanta, sitting in folding chairs at rec centers, churches, and school gymnasiums, listening, always listening. But it wasn't until a quiet Saturday morning when she returned to one of the first neighborhoods she'd grown up in that the impact truly struck her. She stood outside a low brick building that once housed a dental office, long closed. Now, a banner stretched across the top. Fulton MedTech Outreach Center. Opening soon. Inside, volunteers swept, painted, assembled furniture. Denise rolled up her sleeves and grabbed a roller. Maya helped sort books for the reading corner. The space smelled of fresh paint and possibility. A woman approached, soft-spoken and weathered by years of hard work. Miss Moore, she asked, holding a tray of muffins. I'm Loretta. I read about you in the paper. I live 3 blocks over. Denise smiled and shook her hand. Thank you for coming, Loretta. You're the kind of neighbor we want to serve. Loretta's eyes misted. I lost my husband last year. Heart failure. He skipped appointments because he couldn't afford the bus fare. If this place had been here, Denise reached out and gripped her hand. It's here now for you, for him, for the next person who feels they don't have a choice. By the afternoon, the first mobile clinic arrived. Kids gathered, curious. Nurses stepped out with warm smiles, offering free checkups and health info. It wasn't flashy, but it was real. Thomas arrived later that day, casually dressed, sleeves rolled. This is more than I imagined, he said, walking beside Denise through the crowd. She pointed to a wall where a child had painted the words "We see you" in bold blue letters. This is what it means to be seen, she said. They shared a moment of silence, absorbing the sounds around them, children laughing, neighbors talking, the hum of a city waking up to itself. Back at headquarters, the culture continued to shift. HR reported the highest employee satisfaction scores in years. Staff retention improved. Even external stakeholders took notice. A major healthcare journal ran a feature titled "Empathy as a Strategy, the Denise Moore Model." Yet not everyone embraced the change. One morning, Denise received a call from Carla. We found something in the main office mailbox. It's not pleasant. A letter, unsigned. The words were cruel accusations, slurs, warnings to stay in her lane. It was a bitter reminder that progress was never linear. Denise sat alone in her office, the note in her hands. For a while, she didn't move. Then Maya walked in, sensing the tension. Did someone say something mean? Denise nodded slowly. Yes, baby. Some people still don't want to see us win. Maya thought for a moment, then picked up a pen and scribbled something on a sticky note. She placed it next to the letter. They're loud, but you're louder. Denise smiled through the ache. You think I'm loud? Maya grinned. When you care, you thunder. The next morning, Denise walked into the main lobby with the letter in one hand and Maya's sticky note in the other. She walked past the mural, through the crowd of employees arriving early, and pinned both to the community board beside the elevators. Then she stepped back and waited. One by one, people stopped, read, took a moment. Some wrote notes of support. Some shared their own stories. By noon, the board was covered in voices fighting fear with solidarity. That afternoon, Thomas called a town hall. He addressed the crowd gathered in the auditorium. There will always be resistance to truth, he said. But our job isn't to silence it. Our job is to speak louder, stand taller, and live out the values we claim to hold. Denise Moore reminded us of that, and we will continue to follow her lead. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, Denise stood outside with Maya. The sky stretched wide, the air thick with Georgia heat and the electric hum of change. Mama, Maya said, looking up. What's it like when a storm ends? Denise looked out over the city. It doesn't always end, baby. But sometimes we build shelter strong enough to stand through it. And as they turned to leave, her cane forgotten inside, her heart steady and her daughter beside her, Denise knew this fight wasn't over. But it was hers, and she would never stop walking toward the sound of silence, ready to answer it with her voice. 6 months later, the Atlanta sun rose on a different city, not changed by architecture or skyline, but by how its people began to look at one another. The mural outside Fulton MedTech had grown into a living landmark, covered in names, handprints, small prayers in many languages. Tourists stopped to take photos. Locals came to add their own brushstroke. And in the corner, beneath the word hope, was Maya's original blue heart. Untouched, still bold. Inside the building, a new kind of energy buzzed. Departments that once operated in silos now met weekly to discuss not only profits, but people. Denise's Voices from the Field column had become a company-wide podcast where staff shared personal stories, hard truths, and hopes for the future. Thomas had shifted to the role of chairman. And for the first time, the board of directors included 2 new seats reserved for community advocacy, one of them held by a local nurse who'd once received care from the mobile clinic Denise started. And Denise, she now held the title of Chief Community Innovation Officer. It wasn't a role that existed before. She created it because she created it. That morning, she stood in the atrium of a newly completed Fulton Satellite Center in southwest Atlanta. The ribbon cutting was only an hour away. Journalists milled about. City officials chatted over coffee. Denise smoothed her blouse and checked the program. At her side, Maya, now a seasoned public speaker at 10 years old, practiced her lines under her breath. "Mama," Maya whispered. "Do you think Grandma would have liked all this?" Denise smiled, her eyes shining. "She would have been proud, and she would have told me to keep my back straight." Maya grinned. "And don't forget your earrings." Denise laughed softly. "Exactly." Thomas approached with 2 cups of tea. "You ready for this?" Denise took the cup and sipped. "I've been ready. I just didn't always know it." He nodded. "I think we all needed someone to remind us." As the event began, the crowd gathered in front of the center. A podium stood adorned with flowers. A string quartet played softly in the background. When Denise stepped up to speak, a hush fell. She looked over the audience, faces of every age, every color, some in business suits, some in work boots, all present, all listening. "Good morning," she began. "When I was 8 years old, like my daughter here, I used to walk past buildings like this one and think, those places aren't for people like me. Not because anyone told me directly, but because no one ever made space for my mother or her story." She paused. A bird chirped in the tree above the stage. "But today, this space is not about exclusion. It's about inclusion, not charity, but dignity. It's about meeting people where they are and saying, 'We see you. We hear you. And we're walking this journey together.'" The crowd clapped, not politely, but fiercely. Maya stepped forward next. Her voice, though smaller, carried weight. "My mom says people don't need saving. They need seeing. So this place is for everyone who ever felt invisible. You're not. We promise." Tears welled in more than one set of eyes. After the ceremony, as guests toured the new facility, Thomas pulled Denise aside. "There's one more thing," he said, leading her toward the main hallway. At the end stood another framed piece, this one digital. A photo of Denise, Maya, and the original mobile clinic crew. Beneath it, a plaque read, "In honor of those who turned history into healing. May we always listen." Denise ran her fingers over the frame. "You didn't have to do this." "No," Thomas said, "but we get to." Later that evening, after the crowds had gone, Denise and Maya walked alone through the nearly empty center. The walls gleamed. The exam room stood ready. Hope hung thick in the air. They stepped outside, the stars just beginning to wink above them. "Mama," Maya said, slipping her hand into her mother's. "What happens now?" Denise looked out across the parking lot, the street beyond, the endless work yet to be done. "Now," she said, "we keep going. We keep building. We keep listening. And painting." Denise chuckled. "Yes, baby. And painting." They walked toward the car side by side. Shadows long behind them. Futures bright ahead. Because legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you build that others can walk into. And Denise Moore, once dismissed, had built something stronger than a system. She had built belief. And that would echo long after any ribbon was cut. Brought to you by BUP Stories.